I still remember the day I first met Emily. It was at a friend's wedding, of all places. I had just retired from the field, my body still aching from the bullet wound that forced me out. I had dedicated years of my life to serving this country, and now there I was, feeling utterly out of place in a room full of laughter, wine, and small talk. But she was a light in the room, a beacon that drew every eye, including mine. At the time, she was everything I thought I needed. Beautiful, intelligent, and with a smile that promised a new life, one far removed from the dangers I had once faced. Little did I know that behind that smile lurked something far more dangerous than any adversary I had ever encountered in the field. We fell fast. It wasn't long before we were married, living in a suburban dream of neatly cut lawns and weekend barbecues. For a while, I believed in that dream, in her, in us. But over time, something changed. The spark in her eyes dulled. The warmth she once shared with me turned cold, distant. I told myself it was the stress from her new job, working as a marketing executive in some flashy downtown firm. I wanted to believe it was just a phase. But then the late nights started. Excuses about work piling up, deadlines looming, the boss demanding more time. At first, I didn't question it. I didn't want to. I'd spent too many years chasing shadows, too many years searching for the truth behind lies. I didn't want to believe that those shadows could invade my own home. I was wrong. One evening, while she was in the shower, her phone buzzed. She had forgotten to silence it. I didn't plan to snoop. I wasn't that kind of husband, but the name on the screen stopped me cold. Brian. Work. I had heard that name too often in recent months. There was something off about it, a nagging feeling I couldn't shake. Against my better judgment, I opened the message. Can't wait for tomorrow. Last night was incredible. So. My stomach dropped. The words blurred as my hands began to shake. I stood frozen in the hallway, the sound of water running in the background, my world collapsing around me. I knew then. I knew she was betraying me. The days that followed were a blur. I tried to confront her, but the words wouldn't come. How could they? Every time I looked at her, I saw the lies, the deceit. I saw the woman I loved slipping further and further away, replaced by someone I didn't recognize. Finally, one evening after she returned late, smelling of perfume that wasn't hers, I couldn't hold back any longer. "Who is he?" I asked, my voice calm, too calm. Emily froze. For a moment, she didn't speak, her back to me as she placed her purse on the kitchen counter. When she finally turned, her face was a mask of indifference. "Don't start, Jack." "I'm not starting, I'm asking. Who is he?" She rolled her eyes as if my question was an inconvenience. "You're paranoid," she muttered, brushing past me. "Don't lie to me, Emily." My voice rose, the calm breaking. "I know. I've seen the messages. Brian? Is that his name?" For a moment she faltered. Her expression cracked, but then it returned colder. "So what if it is?" she snapped. "Maybe if you weren't so busy feeling sorry for yourself, I wouldn't have had to look elsewhere." Her words were a knife to my gut. Feeling sorry for myself? I retired for us, for this life, for you. "Well, maybe I didn't ask for this life," she spat. "Maybe I want something more." The silence between us was deafening. My mind raced, searching for a response, but all I could feel was betrayal, burning, all-consuming. The woman I thought I knew, the life we had built together, it was all a lie. I clenched my fists, trying to contain the storm raging inside me. "You're going to end this," I said quietly. "You're going to end this, or I will." Her laugh was sharp, cruel. "You think you can control me, Jack? You don't own me. And if you try anything, I'll make sure you regret it." That was the moment I realized how far gone she was. This wasn't the woman I married. This was someone else, someone who was willing to burn everything to the ground. Our marriage, our life, even me. But I wasn't going to let her. Not this time. The night after our confrontation, I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, the weight of Emily's words pressing on my chest. She had made it clear. She didn't care about us anymore. Her affair wasn't a mistake or a fleeting lapse in judgment. It was a deliberate betrayal. And the worst part? She didn't even feel guilty. I could hear her faint breathing next to me, steady and calm, as if nothing had happened. How could she sleep so peacefully while my mind raced with questions, anger, and hurt? I knew then that something had to change. I couldn't live like this, with her lies suffocating every corner of our home. But leaving wasn't an option yet. I needed proof, not just for myself, but for what I was about to do next. In the days that followed, I became more observant. Every detail mattered now. I watched how she carried herself, noticed the subtle changes in her routine. She was always on her phone, texting, checking emails, making late-night calls under the guise of work. But it wasn't just work. It was him, Brian, her boss. It wasn't hard to confirm. A quick search of her call logs, a few saved messages, it all pointed to him. I hated how easy it was. I had spent years hunting criminals, tracking down the most elusive of people. And here, in my own home, it was as if she didn't even try to hide it. I gathered every piece of evidence I could. Photos of their texts, timestamps of calls, even a few work meetings that mysteriously coincided with weekend getaways I knew she hadn't been attending alone. It was all there, laid out in front of me like some sick puzzle, and yet part of me still hoped I was wrong. That maybe somehow this wasn't real. But the truth was staring me in the face, and I couldn't ignore it any longer. One evening, I made the decision. I had to confront Brian. It wasn't enough to just know about their affair. I needed to see him, face to face. I needed to understand why he thought it was okay to destroy my marriage. Why he thought he could take what wasn't his. The next day, I drove to her office. It was a sleek, glass-covered building downtown, the kind of place where everyone wore tailored suits and drank overpriced coffee. I waited in my car for hours, watching the entrance like a hawk. People came and went, but then, just as I was about to give up, I saw them. Emily and Brian, walking side by side, far too close for comfort. They were laughing, lost in their own world, oblivious to the destruction they were causing. I stepped out of my car, my heart pounding in my chest, but as I started towards them, something stopped me. Not fear. No, that wasn't it. It was rage. A slow, simmering rage that told me if I confronted him now, I wouldn't be able to control myself. So I waited. I waited until later that night, when Emily had gone to bed. I picked up my phone and dialed Brian's number. It was saved in her contacts as Brian, work, and the absurdity of it all almost made me laugh. He picked up after 2 rings. "Hello? Brian," I said, my voice low, controlled. There was a pause on the other end. "Yes, who's this?" "This is Jack, Emily's husband." Another pause, longer this time. I could almost hear the gears turning in his head. "What do you want?" "I want to meet. Tomorrow, noon. There's a cafe on 5th. Be there." I didn't wait for his reply. I hung up, my hands shaking with a mixture of adrenaline and fury. The next day, I walked into the cafe at 11:55. It was a small place, quiet, with only a few customers scattered around. I took a seat in the back, facing the door. 5 minutes later, Brian walked in. He was exactly what I expected. Clean-cut, wearing an expensive suit, the kind of guy who believed he was untouchable. He spotted me and hesitated for a moment before making his way over. He sat down across from me, his expression unreadable. "What's this about, Jack?" I stared at him, studying the man who had been sleeping with my wife, the man who thought he could get away with it. "You know exactly what this is about," I said, my voice steady. He didn't flinch. If anything, he seemed bored. "Look, I don't know what Emily's told you, but this isn't your business." I leaned forward, my fists clenching under the table. "It is my business, and it's about to become your business too." For the first time, I saw a flicker of uncertainty cross his face. He wasn't used to being confronted like this. He was the kind of man who manipulated situations from behind the scenes, never getting his hands dirty. "I have everything," I continued. "The texts, the calls, the meetings. I know what you've been doing." Brian's expression hardened. "You don't want to do this." "Oh, but I do," I said, leaning back in my chair. "You see, this isn't just about me and Emily anymore. This is about you. And if you think I'm going to let you get away with it, you're dead wrong." He stared at me for a long moment, his jaw clenched. "What do you want?" I smiled, but it didn't reach my eyes. "I want you out of her life. I want you to cut off whatever you two think you have, and I want you to stay away from my family." Brian scoffed. "And what makes you think I'll do that?" I leaned in again, my voice low and dangerous. "Because if you don't, I'll make sure everyone knows what you've been doing. Not just Emily's colleagues, but your wife, your kids, the entire company. I'll ruin you, Brian." His face paled slightly at the mention of his family. He hadn't expected that. "You wouldn't dare." I didn't blink. "Try me." For a long time, we sat there in silence, the tension between us palpable. Finally, Brian stood up, adjusting his suit jacket as he did. Fine, he said through gritted teeth, but if you think this is over, you're wrong. You'll regret this. I watched him walk out of the cafe, his words hanging in the air like a threat, but I wasn't scared. No, I was ready. Whatever came next, I would be prepared, because this wasn't just about revenge anymore. It was about taking. The confrontation with Brian felt like a temporary victory, but I knew it was just the beginning. He had slunk away from our meeting, but the smugness in his parting words gnawed at me. His threat wasn't hollow. Men like him never walked away quietly. I had learned that in my years as an agent, and as for Emily, I wasn't sure what she was capable of anymore. The tension at home grew unbearable. Emily still hadn't confessed, hadn't even acknowledged that I had caught her red-handed. She acted as if everything was normal, going through the motions of our daily life with an unsettling calm, like nothing had happened. But I could see through her facade. She was waiting for something, biding her time, and that only made me more uneasy. A few nights after my confrontation with Brian, I decided it was time to stop playing defense. I needed to act, to expose everything. I had already gathered enough evidence to prove the affair, but this was no longer about the affair alone. It was about the lies, the manipulation, and the way she seemed intent on pushing me into a corner. I needed to protect myself from whatever came next. That evening, after dinner, I sat in the living room, scrolling through the photos I had taken of their messages, their meeting places, the receipts from hotels she thought I would never find. My lawyer, Miranda, had advised me to be thorough, to make sure there was no room for doubt. We would be filing for divorce soon, but I wasn't going to let it end there, not after everything she had done. As I was going over the evidence again, I heard the front door open and close. Emily walked in, dropping her purse on the kitchen counter. She was home earlier than usual, an unusual change. Something was off. I stood up and faced her as she walked into the living room. She looked at me, her eyes hard. We need to talk. I hadn't expected her to come at me like this, but maybe it was better that way. The confrontation had been coming for days, building in the air between us like a storm waiting to break. I had been bracing for it, and now it was here. I gestured to the couch. Go ahead. She didn't sit. Instead, she crossed her arms and leaned against the doorway, her stance defensive. I know what you've been doing, Jack. I raised an eyebrow, and what exactly is that? Her eyes narrowed. You've been spying on me, going through my phone, following me. What kind of husband does that? I almost laughed at the absurdity of her accusation. She was standing there, accusing me of spying on her, as if she wasn't the one who had torn our marriage apart with her affair. But I didn't laugh. I stayed calm, measured. The kind of husband who knows his wife is cheating on him, I said, my voice steady. The kind of husband who has to protect himself because his wife is trying to destroy him. Her face twisted in anger. Destroy you? Jack, you're the one who's been ruining everything. You couldn't let things go, couldn't just move on. You're obsessed. Move on? I felt the anger rising in my chest, but I kept it in check. You're sleeping with your boss, Emily. How exactly was I supposed to move on from that? She didn't deny it. She didn't even flinch. Instead, she sneered. Maybe if you weren't so wrapped up in your little pity party, we wouldn't be here. Do you ever think about that? Do you ever think that maybe you drove me to this? I stared at her, incredulous. You're blaming me? You left me no choice, she shot back. You're a shell of the man I married. Ever since you left the agency, you've been different. You're not the man I fell in love with. You're weak, Jack. Her words hit like a punch to the gut. Weak. That was how she saw me. It all started to make sense. Why she had drifted away, why she had sought out Brian. In her mind, I wasn't enough anymore. But the anger in me burned hotter than the hurt. I'm weak. I took a step towards her, my voice low. I gave up everything for you. I built this life for us. And what did you do? You threw it all away. She didn't back down. If anything, she seemed to enjoy the confrontation, feeding off the tension. I did what I had to do. You wouldn't understand. I shook my head, disgusted. I understand perfectly. You're selfish, Emily. You always have been. She laughed bitterly. And you're a coward. You're so afraid of losing control, you don't even realize that you already have. I could feel the rage bubbling beneath the surface, but I held it back. I wouldn't give her the satisfaction of seeing me snap. Not now. This is over, I said quietly. I'm done. Her smile faded, replaced by a look of cold calculation. You think it's that easy? You think you can just walk away? I'm not walking away, I said, meeting her gaze. I'm ending this. You and Brian, whatever it is you think you have, it's over. I've got enough evidence to ruin both of you. The affair, the corruption at your company, it's all going to come out. For a moment, she seemed stunned. Then her eyes darkened. You wouldn't dare. Watch me. The silence that followed was heavy, filled with unspoken threats and tension. She knew I wasn't bluffing. She had underestimated me for too long, and now the tables had turned. But then something changed in her expression. The anger was still there, but beneath it, I saw something else. Fear. She was realizing, perhaps for the first time, that she had lost control of the situation. And that terrified her. You're going to regret this, she whispered, her voice low and dangerous. I didn't respond. There was nothing left to say. She stormed out of the living room, I then sent slamming the door behind her. The house echoed with the sound of her retreating footsteps, but I wasn't afraid. Not anymore. I had been in enough dangerous situations to know when the real fight was about to begin. And this was just the beginning. Let me know. Confrontation lingered in the house, thick as fog. Emily avoided me in the following days, but I could see the wheels turning in her head. She was plotting something, though I couldn't quite figure out what. The woman I once loved, the woman who once promised me a life of happiness, had become my enemy. It was a bitter realization, but I had no time for sentiment. If I wanted to protect myself and everything I had worked for, I had to move quickly. The first thing I did was reach out to Miranda, my lawyer. She was sharp, relentless, and as much of a fighter as I had been in my federal agent days. I trusted her to navigate the legal minefield ahead. We met in her office, a small but well-appointed space in the heart of the city. Miranda sat across from me, flipping through the folder of evidence I had gathered. Photos, call logs, texts. Everything that tied Emily to Brian and the corruption at her company. This is solid, she said, nodding in approval. We've got enough here to not only move forward with the divorce, but to build a case against both of them. But I need to ask, Jack, are you sure you're ready for what comes next? Once we pull the trigger on this, it's going to get messy. I stared out the window, the city bustling below us. Was I ready? I wasn't sure, but I knew I didn't have a choice. Emily wasn't going to go quietly, and Brian wasn't the type to back down. This wasn't just about the affair anymore. It was about justice, about taking back control of my life and exposing the truth. I'm ready, I said, my voice firm. Miranda closed the folder and leaned forward. Okay, first things first, the divorce. We'll file the papers immediately. With the evidence you've provided, we can make a strong case for infidelity, which will work in your favor during the settlement. You'll get the house, your assets, and we can minimize any financial loss on your end. And Emily? She'll fight it, no doubt. But with Brian involved, it won't be a clean fight for her. We can leverage her affair and any misconduct in her company to discredit her. Trust me, Jack, she won't walk away from this unscathed. It was exactly what I needed to hear, but part of me still hesitated. There was a time when I would have done anything to protect Emily, even if it meant sacrificing myself. But that time was long gone. She had made her choice, and now I had to make mine. And Brian? I asked, my voice colder than I intended. What about him? Miranda's lips curled into a smile. Brian is another story. We can't go after him personally in the divorce, but we can hit him where it hurts. From what you've told me, there's enough evidence to suggest financial misconduct on his end. If we bring that to light, it won't just damage his reputation, it'll ruin him. The thought of Brian losing everything brought a grim satisfaction. The man who had tried to steal my wife, who had corrupted her, would finally pay for what he had done. I want to make sure he's held accountable, I said, leaning forward. No loose ends. Miranda nodded. We'll take care of him, but we have to be smart about it. Let me reach out to a few contacts in law enforcement. If there's any way to expose his misconduct, I'll find it. As we finalized our plan, I couldn't help but feel a sense of vindication. For the first time in months, I was taking control. I wasn't just reacting to Emily's betrayal. I was fighting back, and I was going to win. That night, I returned home, the weight of the impending battle pressing down on me. Emily was sitting in the living room, her face illuminated by the flicker of the TV. She barely looked up as I walked in. The silence between us was suffocating, but I wasn't interested in breaking it. Not yet. I made my way upstairs to our bedroom, my mind racing with everything that was about to unfold. The divorce papers would be served in the next few days, and then the real fight would begin. Emily would retaliate, that much I knew. But no matter what she threw at me, I was ready, or so I thought. The next morning, I woke to the sound of my phone buzzing. It was a text from Miranda. "We need to talk. Urgent." My heart skipped a beat. Something was wrong. I called her immediately. She picked up after the first ring. "Jack, we've got a problem." "What's going on?" I asked, sitting up in bed. "There's been a development. I don't know how, but Emily must have caught wind of our plan. She's filing charges against you." I froze. "What? Charges for what?" "She's accusing you of domestic abuse," Miranda said, her voice grim. "She's claiming you've been physically violent with her, and she's got witnesses lined up to back her story." The room spun around me. Domestic abuse? I had never laid a hand on her. Why would she do this? "That's insane," I said, my voice shaking. "She's lying. I've never." "I know," Miranda cut in, "but that doesn't matter right now. What matters is that she's trying to get ahead of us. She's framing you, Jack. And if this sticks, not only will it hurt the divorce case, but it could lead to criminal charges." I couldn't breathe. Emily wasn't just trying to destroy our marriage, she was trying to destroy me, and she was doing it in the cruelest, most calculated way possible. "What do we do?" I asked, panic rising in my chest. "We fight it," Miranda said firmly. "I'll start working on a defense right away. We'll need to discredit her witnesses, gather character statements on your behalf, and..." Before she could finish, there was a knock at my front door. I stood, my heart racing. "Hold on, someone's at the door." I walked downstairs, still holding the phone to my ear. When I opened the door, 2 police officers stood on the other side. "Jack Thompson?" one of them asked, his voice stern. I nodded, my stomach dropping. "Yes. We have a warrant for your arrest. You're being charged with domestic violence." I felt the world collapse around me. "Jack?" Miranda's voice echoed through the phone, but I couldn't respond. The officers stepped forward, pulling out handcuffs. "Turn around," the officer said. And just like that, everything I had fought for, everything I had planned, was ripped away. Emily had won the first battle, but this war was far from over. Let me know if... The metallic cold of the handcuffs biting into my wrists was a sharp reminder that I was no longer in control. The officers led me outside, their voices blending with the static on their radios as they read me my rights. I could feel my pulse pounding in my ears, but I forced myself to breathe slowly, to stay calm. Panic wouldn't help now. I had been in worse situations before, but this was different. This time, it was personal. As the officers escorted me to the squad car, I saw Emily standing at the window, watching. Her face was impassive, but I could see it in her eyes. She was enjoying this. She wanted to see me broken, humiliated, dragged away like a criminal. And for a moment, she had succeeded. The drive to the station was a blur. My mind raced through a million scenarios, trying to figure out how she had pulled this off. Domestic abuse? Who were these supposed witnesses? How had she convinced anyone that I was capable of hurting her? The more I thought about it, the angrier I became. This wasn't just about the affair anymore. Emily was trying to destroy me completely. My reputation, my life, everything. But why? What was she getting out of this? Was it revenge? Was she trying to protect Brian? Or was it something deeper? Something I hadn't seen coming? At the station, they processed me quickly. Fingerprints, mugshots, the whole humiliating routine. I had been on the other side of this process so many times during my career, but being the one in handcuffs? That was a new level of hell. After what felt like hours, I was allowed a phone call. I dialed Miranda's number, my hands trembling slightly as I held the receiver. "Jack," she answered, her voice calm but tense. "I heard what happened. I'm on my way to the station now. Just sit tight." "They've charged me, Miranda," I said, my voice low, fighting the anger rising in my chest. "Emily, she's framed me." "I know," she said, "but we're gonna fight this. I'm pulling every string I can. Do not say anything to the police, and don't lose hope. We'll get you out of this." Her confidence gave me a sliver of comfort, but the reality of my situation weighed heavily on me. I had been a federal agent. I knew how these things worked. Once accusations like this were made, the stain they left didn't wash away easily. Even if I was cleared, people would always remember the charges. They'd always wonder if there was truth behind them. Emily had known exactly how to hit me where it hurt most. Hours passed, and I sat in the cold holding cell, surrounded by the sound of clinking metal and murmured conversations from other detainees. My mind kept wandering back to Emily, trying to understand what had driven her to this point. We had been through so much together. How had it come to this? Was it Brian? Was she protecting him, or had she simply become a different person entirely? The cell door finally opened, and a guard called my name. I stood, my legs stiff from sitting so long, and followed him down the dimly lit hall. Miranda was waiting for me in one of the private meeting rooms, her expression a mix of concern and determination. "Jack," she said as I sat down across from her, "they've set a bail hearing for tomorrow. I'll do everything I can to get you out." "Tomorrow?" I shook my head, frustrated. "Emily's already won the first round, hasn't she?" Miranda leaned forward, her eyes sharp. "She hasn't won anything yet. I've been working on gathering evidence to prove this was a setup. The witnesses she's lined up? 2 of them are coworkers from her office. They've got a history of shady dealings, and I'm pulling records on them now. If we can discredit their testimony, we'll weaken her case." "But what about Emily? How do we prove she's lying?" "That's the harder part," Miranda admitted. "Right now, it's her word against yours, and given the nature of the charges, the court will be cautious. But there's something you need to know." I tensed. "What?" "Brian's involved in this too. I've been digging into his connection to Emily and her company, and there are signs that he's been pulling strings behind the scenes. I wouldn't be surprised if this whole thing was orchestrated by him. He's protecting himself, and he's using Emily to do it." The realization hit me like a freight train. Brian wasn't just some passive player in this nightmare. He was actively working to destroy me. The affair wasn't enough for him. He wanted me out of the picture entirely. "Why?" I muttered, more to myself than to Miranda. "Why go this far?" "Power," she said simply. "Control. Brian's the kind of man who doesn't like loose ends. You're a threat, Jack. You know too much, and you won't back down. This is his way of making sure you're out of the way, permanently." I clenched my fists, feeling the anger burning inside me. "He's not going to win this. I won't let him." Miranda smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. "That's the spirit I need you to keep. But you have to understand, Jack, this is going to get uglier before it gets better." I nodded, the weight of her words sinking in. "I'm ready, whatever it takes." The next morning, I was brought before the judge for my bail hearing. The courtroom was small and dimly lit, the air thick with tension. Emily sat across the room, her face cold and impassive, as if she were watching a stranger's trial. Brian wasn't there, but I could feel his presence lurking in the shadows, pulling the strings. Miranda stood by my side, her voice clear and steady as she made the case for my release. She laid out the evidence, the holes in Emily's story, the questionable nature of her so-called witnesses. But the prosecution pushed back, painting me as a violent man, a husband who had lost control and taken his anger out on his wife. The judge listened carefully, his expression unreadable. When the arguments were done, he leaned forward, hands clasped in front of him. "Bail is set at $100,000, he said. It wasn't the worst outcome, but it wasn't a win either. I was grateful that Miranda had managed to get me released, but the price was steep, both financially and emotionally. As I walked out of the courthouse, free for the moment, but still weighed down by the charges hanging over my head, I caught a glimpse of Emily standing outside. She didn't approach me, didn't say a word. She just stared at me, her eyes filled with something I couldn't quite place. Anger, fear, triumph, or maybe all three. I had won a small victory today, but I knew this battle was far from over. Emily and Brian were still out there, plotting their next move, and I had to be ready for whatever came next. This wasn't just about clearing my name anymore. It was about survival. And I was prepared to fight like hell to win. The cold air outside the courthouse stung my face as I walked away from the building, my mind still reeling from the events of the past few days. I had been granted bail, but the real fight was just beginning. Emily had gone to lengths I hadn't imagined, accusing me of abuse, framing me for a crime I didn't commit, and she wasn't acting alone. Brian was the puppet master, and I knew that as long as he was pulling the strings, they wouldn't stop until I was completely destroyed. But they had underestimated me. I drove back to my house in silence, my thoughts bouncing between strategies, plans, and possible next steps. Miranda had laid out a solid defense, but we both knew that this wasn't going to be a straightforward legal battle. This was personal. I needed to hit back, and not just in the courtroom. I spent the night reviewing every piece of evidence I had, going over the timeline of events, and thinking about what Miranda had said about Brian. If he was using Emily to protect himself, there had to be more to this than just an affair. Something deeper was going on, and I was determined to find out what. The next morning, I met with Miranda in her office again. She was already knee-deep in paperwork, her eyes scanning through documents at lightning speed. "I've got a lead," she said without looking up. "What is it?" I asked, taking a seat across from her. Miranda slid a folder across the desk. "I've been digging into Brian's financials. His company has been under investigation for months. Embezzlement, money laundering, fraud. It's all there, hidden beneath layers of corporate accounts and offshore holdings." I opened the folder and scanned the documents inside. The numbers and names blurred together, but one thing was clear. Brian was dirty. This wasn't just about my marriage anymore. Brian had been involved in illegal activities long before he ever met Emily, and now he was using her and me as pawns to cover his tracks. "This explains a lot," I muttered. "Emily, she's been caught up in this too, hasn't she?" Miranda nodded. "It looks like Brian's been using her to funnel money through her company. She probably doesn't even realize the full extent of what's going on, but she's involved, whether she likes it or not. That's why they're trying to take you down. You're a threat because you know too much." I sat back in my chair, the weight of the revelation sinking in. Emily had betrayed me. Yes, but she was also in over her head. Brian had dragged her into something far more dangerous than an affair. And now, they were both desperate to keep it hidden. "We need to expose this," I said, my voice resolute. "If we can prove what Brian's been doing, it'll discredit everything they've said about me. It'll turn the tables." Miranda smiled. "That's exactly what I'm working on. I've got contacts in law enforcement who are already looking into Brian's company. If we can gather enough evidence, we can bring him down. But we have to be careful. He's powerful, and he won't go down without a fight." I nodded, my mind racing with possibilities. Brian had played his hand, but now it was my turn. I wasn't just going to defend myself. I was going to dismantle everything he had built, piece by piece. The next few days were a whirlwind of meetings, phone calls, and investigations. Miranda and I worked tirelessly to build our case, uncovering more and more of Brian's corrupt dealings. It was like pulling a thread on a sweater. Once we started, the whole thing began to unravel. But I knew we had to be careful. Brian wasn't stupid, and neither was Emily. They would catch on to what we were doing sooner or later, and when they did, they would strike back. I just didn't expect it to happen so soon. One evening, as I was driving home from a meeting with Miranda, my phone buzzed. It was a text from an unknown number. "You think you can stop this? You have no idea what you're dealing with. Back off before it's too late." My heart raced as I read the message. Brian, he knew, and now he was threatening me. But the message only fueled my resolve. I wasn't backing down. Not now, not ever. I forwarded the text to Miranda, who responded immediately. "This is good. It proves he's feeling the heat, but we need more. Stay sharp." That night, I didn't sleep. I stayed up, reviewing the evidence again, thinking about what Brian might do next. I knew he was dangerous, but I wasn't afraid. I had faced worse in my career. What scared me more was the realization that Emily, the woman I had once loved, was willing to go along with all of this. She had chosen Brian over me, over the truth, and that betrayal cut deeper than anything else. The next day, things took an even darker turn. I was sitting in my office, going through more of the documents Miranda had sent over, when I got a call from her. "Jack," she said, her voice urgent. "Something's happened. Emily's filed for a restraining order against you." "What?" I said, shocked. "On what grounds?" "She's claiming that you've been harassing her, sending threatening messages, following her. She's using the domestic violence accusation to push for it. If the court grants it, it could affect your case." I felt a wave of anger wash over me. "She's lying, Miranda. I haven't done any of that." "I know," she said quickly, "but this is a tactical move. She's trying to paint you as the aggressor to weaken your defense. We need to fight this. but it's going to complicate things. I leaned back in my chair, running a hand through my hair. Emily was going all in, using every weapon she had to bring me down. And now, with this restraining order, she was trying to cut off my last line of defense. What do we do? I asked, trying to stay calm. We fight it, Miranda said. I'm already working on a counter-strategy. We'll present the evidence of her affair, her connection to Brian, and the financial misconduct. But we need to be careful. This is a critical moment. If the court sides with her, it could damage your credibility. I nodded, though the knot of frustration in my chest tightened. I'm ready, Miranda, whatever it takes. As I hung up the phone, I realized just how far this had gone. What had started as an affair had spiraled into a web of lies, corruption, and now legal warfare. Emily and Brian were willing to do whatever it took to protect themselves, even if it meant destroying me in the process. But they had underestimated one thing. I wasn't the kind of man who gave up easily. I had been a federal agent for most of my life. I had faced down criminals, terrorists, and men far more dangerous than Brian, and I had never backed down. This fight, it was personal, yes, but it was also a fight for justice, and I wasn't going to stop until I won. Let me know if you'd like to continue to Chapter 7. The day of the court hearing came faster than I expected. Every nerve in my body was wound tight as I prepared to face Emily in court. I had faced down enemies in dark alleys, led covert operations in hostile territories, but none of that compared to the tension that gripped me now. This wasn't just a fight for my freedom, it was a battle for my life as I knew it. Everything hung in the balance. Miranda and I arrived early at the courthouse. She was as composed as ever, her sharp suit and calm demeanor betraying none of the stress she must have been under. I admired her for that. She was relentless, focused, and ready for the fight. I wished I could say the same for myself, but the weight of what was happening gnawed at me. As we walked into the courtroom, I saw Emily sitting at the plaintiff's table, her lawyer by her side. She looked serene, almost indifferent, as if this was just another routine in her day. But I knew her better than that. Behind her composed exterior, she was calculating, watching every move, every expression. Brian wasn't there. He was too smart to get involved directly in the court proceedings. But his presence was felt in every step Emily took. She was his puppet, and together, they were trying to tear me apart. The judge, a stern-looking man with graying hair and a sharp gaze, entered the room, and the proceedings began. The case was simple on the surface. Emily had filed for a restraining order against me, claiming harassment and domestic violence. If granted, the order would not only affect my ability to defend myself in the divorce, but could lead to criminal charges. My freedom, my reputation, and my future were all on the line. Emily's lawyer was slick, the kind of man who oozed confidence and arrogance. He laid out their case in a smooth, methodical way, painting me as a bitter, vengeful husband who couldn't handle the end of his marriage. Mr. Thompson has repeatedly harassed my client, he said, his voice dripping with false concern. He sent threatening messages, followed her to work, and made her fear for her safety. My client has tried to move on from the marriage, but Mr. Thompson refuses to let go. Emily sat there, her eyes downcast, playing the role of the victim perfectly. I clenched my fists under the table, biting back the urge to shout the truth. She was lying. But I had to trust that Miranda would reveal the truth for what it was. When it was Miranda's turn, she stood with a quiet intensity. Your Honor, we intend to show that these accusations are baseless. Not only has Mr. Thompson not harassed or threatened his wife, but we also have evidence that Mrs. Thompson and her employer, Brian Matthews, have been engaged in an extramarital affair and are attempting to frame my client as a way to cover up illegal activities involving corporate embezzlement. The courtroom buzzed with murmurs at Miranda's bold statement. The judge raised an eyebrow, but motioned for her to continue. Miranda laid out our defense carefully. She showed the court the evidence we had collected. The texts, the calls, the suspicious financial transactions involving Emily's company and Brian's influence. She painted a picture of betrayal, manipulation, and corruption, all aimed at destroying me to protect their illicit dealings. Mrs. Thompson and Mr. Matthews have both used the divorce proceedings to obscure their financial misconduct, Miranda continued. They've crafted this narrative of abuse to distract from the real issue, their attempt to cover up corporate fraud. and we have proof." She submitted the documents to the court, and I saw a flicker of uncertainty cross Emily's face for the first time. She hadn't expected us to come prepared. I felt a surge of hope. Maybe we could turn this around after all. But then Emily took the stand. I had dreaded this moment. Seeing her up there, recounting her version of events, was a twisted, nightmarish version of the truth. She told the court about our confrontations, about how I had become controlling after the affair, how I had threatened her when she tried to leave. Every word out of her mouth was a lie, but it was delivered with such conviction that, for a moment, I almost believed she had convinced herself it was true. Her lawyer guided her through the testimony expertly, weaving a story of fear, victimhood, and a marriage gone wrong. She played the part perfectly, tearful, trembling at just the right moments. When Miranda cross-examined her, she poked holes in Emily's story, pointing out inconsistencies, contradictions, and the suspicious timing of her accusations. But Emily stuck to her narrative, her answers calculated and careful. It was a battle of wits, and while Miranda was sharp, Emily's performance was difficult to discredit in one go. The judge called a recess before delivering his decision. As I sat there, the tension in the room was unbearable. I could see the uncertainty in Miranda's eyes. Emily had played the system well, and despite our best efforts, there was no telling how the judge would rule. After what felt like an eternity, the judge returned to the bench. "I've reviewed the evidence and listened to both parties' arguments," he began, his voice neutral. "This is a complex case, and the accusations made are serious. However, based on the testimony provided and the documents submitted, it is clear that there are substantial questions about the credibility of both parties." My heart pounded in my chest. This was it, the moment that would decide everything. "At this time, I am not granting a permanent restraining order against Mr. Thompson," the judge continued. "However, due to the nature of the accusations, a temporary order will remain in place until further investigation into the financial allegations can be completed." A wave of relief washed over me. It wasn't a complete victory, but it was enough. The judge hadn't bought Emily's lies outright, and the investigation into Brian's corruption would continue. The courtroom buzzed again, and I saw Emily's face twist in frustration. She had expected to win, to have me silenced, but now she had to deal with the fallout of the investigation. As we left the courtroom, Miranda turned to me. "We did well today, Jack. It's not over yet, but this was a major step in the right direction." I nodded, my heart still racing. "Brian's not going to let this go. He's going to fight back." Miranda smiled grimly. "Let him. We're ready." The battle wasn't over, far from it, but for the first time in months, I felt like I had a chance. Emily and Brian had thrown everything at me, and I was still standing. The truth was beginning to unravel, and soon the whole web of lies they had spun would collapse. But I knew the road ahead would be long and filled with more twists and turns. Brian wasn't done with me yet, and Emily still had cards to play. But I was ready. This was a war, and I wasn't going to lose. Let me know if you'd like to continue. Temporary victory in court was a small but significant crack in Emily and Brian's carefully constructed facade. I could see the frustration in Emily's eyes as we left the courthouse, and I knew that Brian, wherever he was seething over the judge's decision. They had thrown everything at me, and while I was still reeling from the accusations and the ongoing legal battles, I had something they didn't. Time. Time to expose their corruption, time to gather more evidence, and time to fight back. As the days passed, Miranda and I continued to dig into Brian's financial dealings. We had already uncovered evidence of embezzlement and fraud, but it wasn't enough to bring him down completely. We needed something bigger, something that would not only clear my name but dismantle Brian's empire entirely. Miranda worked tirelessly, reaching out to her contacts in law enforcement and corporate auditing firms. Bit by bit, the pieces of Brian's operation began to fall into place. We discovered that he had been laundering money through multiple shell companies, using Emily's position in her firm to cover up his tracks. Emily, knowingly or not, had become a crucial player in his game of deception. She had always been ambitious, eager to climb the corporate ladder, and Brian had used that ambition to manipulate her. But now, the walls were closing in. One evening, as I was going over the latest financial reports Miranda had sent me, my phone buzzed. It was a text from an unknown number. "We need to talk. I'm ready to make a deal." It was Emily. My chest tightened as I stared at the message. After everything she had done, after all the lies and betrayal, now she wanted to talk? I wasn't sure if it was another trap or if she was genuinely desperate, but either way, I knew I couldn't ignore it. This could be the opportunity I had been waiting for. I texted her back, keeping my message short and to the point. Where and when? The next day, I met Emily in a small, dimly lit cafe on the outskirts of town. It was a place we used to go when we first started dating, back when everything between us was still real, still full of hope. Now, the place felt like a relic of a past life, a stark contrast to the tension that hung between us. Emily sat at a table in the corner, her hands wrapped tightly around a cup of coffee. She looked tired, worn down by the months of fighting and deceit, but there was something else in her eyes: fear. I sat down across from her, keeping my expression neutral. You wanted to talk, so talk. She didn't meet my eyes at first. Instead, she stared down at her coffee as if searching for the right words. "This has gotten out of hand," she said quietly. I raised an eyebrow. "You think?" Her jaw tightened, and she finally looked up at me. "I didn't want any of this to happen, Jack. I didn't plan for it to go this far." "Didn't plan for it?" I couldn't keep the anger out of my voice. "You framed me for domestic violence, Emily. You tried to ruin my life." "I didn't have a choice," she snapped, her voice rising. "Brian, he's dangerous, Jack. You don't know what he's capable of. He told me to do it. He said if I didn't, he'd destroy me. And I leaned forward, my eyes locking with hers. "And you thought destroying me was the better option? What the hell happened to you, Emily?" She looked away again, her eyes filling with something that might have been regret. "I made a mistake," she whispered. "I made a lot of mistakes. But Brian, he's not going to stop. He's already preparing to take you down for good. You don't know the people he's connected to. If you keep pushing, he'll come after you, and he won't care who gets hurt." I sat back in my chair, letting her words sink in. I had known Brian was dangerous, but hearing it from Emily confirmed that he was even more ruthless than I had imagined. But I couldn't afford to back down now, not when I was so close to exposing him. "So, what's your play here, Emily?" I asked, my voice cold. "You're just going to walk away from all this? Pretend none of it happened?" She shook her head, her hands trembling slightly as she set down her coffee. "No, I can't. But I can help you." "Help me?" I almost laughed. "Why would I trust you after everything you've done?" "Because I know where the bodies are buried," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I know everything. Brian's accounts, his offshore dealings, the people he's been paying off. I can give you the proof you need to take him down." I studied her face, trying to gauge whether she was telling the truth. There was a desperation in her eyes that hadn't been there before. She was scared, truly scared. And it wasn't just of Brian. She was scared of what her life had become, of the mess she had helped create. "If you're serious about this," I said slowly, "you're going to need to go on record. Testify against him. Turn over everything you have." She hesitated, biting her lip as she considered my words. "If I do that, Brian will come after me. He'll destroy me. And if you don't, he'll destroy both of us," I countered. "You're already in too deep, Emily. This is your only way out." For a long moment, she was silent. Then, finally, she nodded. "Okay, I'll do it." The next few days were a whirlwind of preparation. Emily turned over all the evidence she had: documents, emails, financial records, everything that tied Brian to his illegal activities. It was more than enough to bring him down. Miranda worked tirelessly to compile it all into a case strong enough to not only clear my name, but to bring Brian's entire operation crashing down. But I knew it wasn't going to be easy. Brian had built his empire on lies, manipulation, and power. He wasn't going to go down without a fight. The day we submitted the evidence to the authorities, I felt a strange mix of relief and dread. The fight was almost over, but the danger was far from gone. Brian still had allies, people who would do anything to protect him. Emily was still living in fear, and I knew that as long as Brian was out there, neither of us would be truly safe. But we had done what we needed to do. The truth was out there now, and Brian's days of untouchable power were numbered. I met with Miranda after the evidence was submitted. She looked more tired than I had ever seen her, but there was a fire in her eyes that told me we were close. "We did it," she said, a small smile tugging at the corners of her lips. "It's in their hands now." I nodded, feeling the weight of the months of stress and fear beginning to lift. "What happens next?" "Now we wait," Miranda said, "and we prepare for the fallout." Brian's empire didn't crumble overnight, but the cracks were visible. As the investigation deepened, more people came forward, more evidence was uncovered. The house of cards Brian had built was collapsing, and there was nothing he could do to stop it. But I knew he wouldn't go down quietly. And when the final confrontation came, I would be ready. Followed the submission of the evidence were tense, filled with a mix of anticipation and anxiety. Brian's empire was crumbling, but it wasn't happening fast enough. He had lawyers, connections, and enough money to drag the process out as long as possible. But no matter how long he delayed, the walls were closing in. The news broke quietly at first. A story about corporate fraud, offshore accounts, and embezzlement involving Brian's company appeared in a few business outlets. But soon, it snowballed. Larger media outlets picked it up, and within days, Brian Matthews, once a respected name in the corporate world, became synonymous with scandal. I watched it unfold from the sidelines, a strange sense of satisfaction settling over me. For months, I had been painted as the villain, the unhinged ex-husband trying to destroy his wife's life. But now, the truth was out there. Brian was exposed for what he truly was, a criminal. Emily had gone into hiding. She'd been granted immunity in exchange for her testimony, and while she wasn't proud of the role she'd played, she knew it was her only way out. She wasn't blameless, but her cooperation had been instrumental in bringing Brian down. Miranda and I had done everything we could, and now the authorities were handling the rest. But even with the legal victory in sight, the emotional toll of the past year weighed heavily on me. I had lost so much: my marriage, my peace of mind, and at times my sense of who I was. But I had also gained something unexpected: clarity. For the first time in a long time, I could see a future that wasn't defined by the pain and betrayal of the past. It was a rainy afternoon when I got the call from Miranda. I had been sitting in my small home office, going through old case files from my time as a federal agent, trying to find a sense of normalcy again. The sound of the rain tapping against the window was oddly soothing, a backdrop to the storm that had been my life for the past several months. "Jack," Miranda said, her voice steady but laced with an undercurrent of excitement. "It's done." I sat up straight, my heart skipping a beat. "What do you mean?" "Brian's been arrested. The authorities raided his office this morning. They've charged him with fraud, money laundering, and several other counts. He's going to prison, Jack." For a moment, I didn't know how to respond. It was the news I had been waiting for, the culmination of everything we had fought for. But hearing it, knowing that Brian was finally going to face justice, felt surreal. "Are you sure?" I asked, my voice quieter than I expected. "I'm sure," Miranda said, a smile evident in her tone. "It's over." I closed my eyes, letting the weight of her words sink in. It was over. Brian was done. Emily's lies had been exposed, and my name had been cleared. The nightmare that had consumed my life for so long was finally coming to an end. "Thank you," I said after a long pause, "for everything." "You don't have to thank me, Jack. You did this. You fought back when most people would have crumbled. You should be proud." I wasn't sure if proud was the right word. I felt exhausted, relieved, but there was still a lingering sense of loss. Brian was gone, but so was the life I thought I had with Emily. And no matter how much justice I achieved, that was something I couldn't get back. A few days later, I sat down with Emily for the last time. It was a strange, bittersweet meeting. We met in a quiet park on the outskirts of the city, far away from the chaos that had consumed our lives. She looked different now, more subdued, like the weight of everything she had done was finally catching up with her. I couldn't tell if it was regret or just exhaustion, but there was something vulnerable in her demeanor that I hadn't seen before. "I'm leaving town," she said quietly, not meeting my eyes. "I need a fresh start. After everything, I don't know who I am anymore." I nodded, understanding more than I cared to admit. I think we both need that. Emily sighed, running a hand through her hair. "I never wanted it to end like this, Jack. I didn't mean for things to get so out of control." "But they did," I said, my voice calm but firm. And you had a choice, Emily. You could have stopped it at any time. She looked away, her shoulders slumping. I know, I made mistakes, huge ones, and I'm going to have to live with that for the rest of my life. There was a long silence between us, the kind that spoke of everything left unsaid. The love we once had, the life we once built, it was all gone now. But despite everything, I didn't hate her. I couldn't. She had been manipulated, yes, but she had also made her own choices. And now, she had to live with the consequences. I hope you find what you're looking for, I said softly, meaning it. She looked up at me, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. I hope you do too. We parted ways that day, not as enemies, but as two people who had once loved each other and lost their way. I watched her walk away, the rain beginning to fall in soft droplets, and I felt a strange sense of peace. It wasn't closure, not exactly, but it was enough. Life after Brian's downfall was quieter, more peaceful, but it wasn't without its challenges. I had spent so long fighting, so long consumed by anger and betrayal, that I wasn't sure how to move forward. But slowly, I began to rebuild. I returned to my old work, consulting on federal cases, and found purpose again. I reconnected with friends, people I had pushed away during the darkest days of my life. And then there was Miranda. Our relationship had started as strictly professional, but somewhere along the way, it had become more. She had stood by me when no one else had, fought for me when I didn't know how to fight for myself. And now, as the dust settled, I realized that I cared for her deeply. It wasn't the kind of love I had once shared with Emily. This was different, built on trust, respect, and shared experiences. Miranda wasn't just my lawyer. She had become my partner in more ways than one. One evening, after another long day of work, I invited her over for dinner. We sat on the back porch, the setting sun casting a golden glow over the yard. We didn't talk about the past. There was no need to. We had both lived it, survived it, and now we were looking toward the future. I think it's time for a fresh start, I said, breaking the comfortable silence. Miranda looked at me, her eyes warm and understanding. What kind of start? I smiled, feeling lighter than I had in years. One that doesn't involve courtrooms or lawsuits. One where we can just be. She smiled back, and in that moment, I knew that I had finally found something worth holding on to. A new beginning. And this time, I wasn't going to let it slip away. The early morning sun bathed the world in a soft golden light as I stood on my porch, breathing in the crisp air. It had been months since Brian's arrest, months since I had watched Emily walk out of my life for the last time. The storm that had once raged through every corner of my existence had finally passed, and now there was a quiet calm. It wasn't perfect, but it was peace. And that was enough. Life had a strange way of moving on, even after everything you thought defined it had crumbled away. There had been moments when I wasn't sure I'd make it to this point, when the weight of betrayal and fear seemed too much to bear. But here I was, still standing, stronger than I had ever been before. Miranda had become a constant presence in my life, not just as the lawyer who had helped clear my name, but as someone I could lean on, someone who understood the darkness I had been through because she had stood by me through it all. Our relationship had grown slowly, naturally, built on a foundation of trust that had been tested in ways most people could never imagine. We weren't in a rush. After everything, we both knew the importance of healing, of giving each other the time and space to move forward without the baggage of the past weighing us down. But it was undeniable. The connection between us had deepened into something more than just friendship or professional respect. It was something real, something I hadn't felt in a long time. One evening, as the days grew warmer and the memories of the storm began to fade, I decided it was time to embrace that future. Miranda and I had spent so much time rebuilding my life, and now it was time to build something together. I invited her over for dinner again, a quiet night at home, just the two of us. We had developed a comfortable routine, shared meals, long conversations about work, life, and everything in between. There were no grand gestures or romantic declarations, but there was a steady, quiet certainty between us. And that meant more than any fleeting passion ever could. That evening, as we sat together on the back porch, watching the sun dip below the horizon, I felt the words I had been holding back rise to the surface. "I never thought I'd be here," I said softly, breaking the silence. "Not after everything." Miranda looked at me, her expression thoughtful. Here as in? As in, with you. I smiled, feeling a strange mix of nervousness and certainty. I spent so much time fighting, so much time lost in all the pain and anger. But you helped me find my way out of that. I don't think I'd be here without you. She didn't say anything for a moment, just smiled that calm, steady smile of hers that had become so familiar to me. You give me too much credit, Jack, she said finally. You were the one who fought back. I just helped you along the way. I reached out, taking her hand in mine. Maybe, but I don't want to do it alone anymore. She looked at me then, her eyes searching mine, and I saw the same vulnerability I had felt for so long. But there was something else too, hope. I don't want to do it alone either, she said softly. It wasn't a grand romantic confession, but it was perfect. It was real. In that moment, everything clicked into place. We had both been through so much, but we had come out the other side stronger, together. The months that followed were a time of rebuilding, not just for me, but for us. Miranda and I slowly started to share more of our lives. Weekends away, quiet evenings at home, and moments of laughter that had once seemed impossible to me. Brian's trial came and went. He was sentenced to years in prison, his empire in ruins. Emily had testified against him, and while I hadn't seen her since our last meeting, I heard through the grapevine that she had moved out of the city, starting over somewhere far away from the chaos she had helped create. I didn't hate her anymore. I had made my peace with what happened. She was part of my past, but she didn't define my future. My name was cleared, and the weight of the legal battles lifted from my shoulders. But more than that, I had found something worth fighting for in the process. I had found someone who saw me for who I was, not just for what I had been through. One morning, as Miranda and I sat together on the porch, sipping our coffee in the quiet of the early dawn, I felt a sense of peace that I hadn't known was possible. I've been thinking, I said, glancing over at her. Oh no, that's dangerous, she teased, raising an eyebrow. I laughed, feeling lighter than I had in years. No, really. I've been thinking about the future. She set her mug down, turning to face me fully. What about it? I don't know, I said, my voice soft but steady. I guess I just want to know if you see me in it, because I can't imagine mine without you. Miranda smiled, her eyes warm and full of understanding. I see you in my future, Jack. I've seen you there for a while now. I reached out, taking her hand in mine, and for the first time in what felt like forever, I allowed myself to fully embrace the hope of what was to come. There were no more shadows hanging over us, no more betrayals to uncover, no more lies to tear down. Just a new beginning, one built on love, trust, and the promise of a future that neither of us had thought possible. As the sun rose higher in the sky, casting its golden light over the world, I knew that I was ready. Ready for whatever came next. Ready to move forward, and ready to finally let go of the past. This was my life now, a life I had fought for, a life I had reclaimed. And with Miranda by my side, it was a life I was excited to live. The storm had passed, and in its place was something far more beautiful. Hope. The end. Thank you for staying with me through this journey. I hope this story resonated with you and delivered the emotional depth and closure you were looking for. Let me know if you'd like to explore any more stories in the future.